The sky had forgotten what blue looked like. Ash and quiet had become the only language the earth spoke, and the stars had turned cold and distant, like silent witnesses who had already judged. It wasn't fire or brute invasion that ended humanity's golden age, but something worse, an elegant theft. The Drakon came not with weapons, but with technology so superior, so perfect, that mankind surrendered not in war, but in awe. They offered clean energy, food replication, cures for every disease, even dreams sculpted into reality. And humanity, blind with gratitude, gave everything in return. Culture, autonomy, Earth itself. Until one day, people woke up in cages they built for themselves with smiling faces and open hands. And when the Drakon no longer needed humans, they simply left, taking the sun with them. The sky dimmed not just metaphorically, but literally. Their star-forging machines collapsed Earth's orbit just enough to lock the planet in perpetual dusk. Photosynthesis slowed, oceans receded, and the cold crept into the bones of the world like a virus. What remained were Flicker's tiny embers, of humanity hidden beneath ruins and rust, breathing through scavenged masks and stubborn hope. Among them was Mara, a woman with ash-blonde hair and eyes that looked like she had watched too many farewells. She lived alone in a greenhouse dome that barely held warmth, stitching together plants like broken dolls, trying to grow life from dying dirt. People called her the warden of the last garden, though she called herself nothing at all. Her voice hadn't echoed beyond the glass in years, but one night, under the blood-tinged half-light of the faded moon, a crash trembled through the soil like a sob in the dark. It wasn't thunder, it was too purposeful. Something had fallen. Something alive. Mara didn't move at first. She crouched beneath the fragile leaves of her potato vines, listening with the patience of someone who had buried her past in silence. The crash had landed in the southern crater, a dead zone scorched by radiation and filled with whispering machines that still hummed the lullabies of dead satellites. No human went there. But she wasn't like most left on Earth. She hadn't survived for survival's sake. She had stayed for a reason she hadn't spoken aloud in 10 years. When she reached the crater, wrapped in a suit patched with tape and memory, she found a shape not meant for this world. It shimmered like water folded into itself, a ship wounded. In grace, metal twisted like ribs. Sparks flickered like fireflies lost in snow. And lying outside the wreck was a creature 7 feet tall, limbs elegant and thin, covered in bioluminescent veins that pulsed like a heartbeat, but its light was fading. It was dying. And not from wounds, but from the atmosphere, from the gravity, from a world that no longer welcomed stars. It raised its head with difficulty. No faces humans knew, just a mask of shifting light and mirrored skin. It reached one elongated hand toward her, not as a threat, but a plea. In that moment, Mara should have run. She should have left it to the dark and gone back to her garden. But she didn't. She stepped forward, closer to the unknown, like a moth ignoring the cold and flying into something warmer than flame. And as she touched its fingers, feeling the trembling life behind the strange skin, it didn't speak in sound, but in a sudden flood of emotion, pain, hunger, fear, and something else beneath it all, regret. The alien had not come to conquer. It had come because it had nowhere else to go. Mara breathed in, slow and heavy, and for the first time in a decade, she whispered aloud, "You shouldn't have come here. We're already ghosts." But the creature held tighter, and in its light she saw something she hadn't seen in years. Hope. Fragile and aching, looking for shelter. Asterisk, the trek back to the greenhouse felt longer with the alien in tow, though. It weighed nothing on Mara's makeshift sled, its frame improvised from broken drone parts and layered tarp. The creature's body pulsed dimly beneath the cloth, like a dying ember trying to resist the cold wind that whispered through the cracked earth. Mara didn't speak on the way back. She never did. Words had become a rare currency, too expensive for a world where even breath had to be rationed. But inside, her thoughts churned like rested gears, waking from long sleep. She didn't know why she was helping this thing. It could be a scout, a weapon, a Drakon, though it didn't look like them. They were precise, golden, symmetrical in a way that felt unnatural. This one was softer, broken in ways that made it almost familiar. It bled blue, for God's sake. She hadn't seen blood of any kind in years. By the time she reached her dome, the storm had risen. Sand and ash battered the glass, and the filtered solar panels buzzed weakly in protest. Her greenhouse wasn't much, an ancient biodome held together with salvaged carbon plating and love, but it had warmth, filtered air, and the last living things she could protect. Rows of kirked plants leaned toward synthetic lamps like children, reaching for a vanished sun. She opened the inner airlock, ushered the sled in, and sealed it behind them with a hiss. For a moment, silence returned. Heavy and sacred dot, she placed the alien gently on a cot meant for storing compost, and as the pressure normalized, it gasped, its chest expanding too fast, too deep, like it was drowning in air. It convulsed once, then again, and Mara instinctively grabbed her oldest medkit, fingers moving before thought could interfere. She didn't know its anatomy. Everything she did was guesswork, but she tried. She adjusted the oxygen levels, dimmed the lights, wrapped heat bands around what might have been limbs. She whispered, not because it would understand, but because something inside her needed to say the words. Easy. Just breathe. You're not alone now. It stopped shaking. Slowly, cautiously, the glowing veins in its body brightened just enough to illuminate the jagged ceiling. Its eyes, or the spots where the light pooled on its face, shifted toward her. Not calculating, not analyzing, just watching like a child waking from a nightmare and seeing something kind. Mara sat beside it, cross-legged on the floor, her suit half unzipped, revealing a necklace made of scrap metal and a tiny cube of burnt circuitry, her last piece of a brother who once dreamed of flying. You shouldn't trust me, she said eventually, voice hoarse. Humans don't deserve trust anymore. We gave up everything that made us worthy. The alien didn't speak. Instead, it raised a trembling hand and pointed at the garden behind her. A gesture so simple, it nearly broke her. Among the dying world, it had seen her plants, her fragile little effort to hold on to nurture. That was what it noticed first. Mara felt the sharp sting of tears threaten. She blinked hard, swallowing emotions like poison. You're going to die here, she murmured. This world, it kills everything soft. But the creature's fingers curled around her wrist with quiet determination. It wasn't soft. It had survived a crash, a planet it couldn't breathe in, and still it reached out. Still, it looked at a woman in rags with a garden made of salvage. And believed in something. She sighed, leaning her back against the metal wall. Fine, you can stay, but I'm not your savior. I'm not even sure I'm human anymore. The alien finally made a sound. A gentle hum, not from vocal cords, but vibration through the floor, resonating in her bones like a lullaby sung across galaxies. The note was lonely, aching, but threaded with something unmistakable. Gratitude, doubt in the silence that followed. Mara touched her necklace again, tracing the sharp edge of the melted circuit. I buried a dream once, she whispered, unsure if she was speaking to herself or the creature. Maybe it's time I tried digging it back up. For the first time in years, the dome didn't feel so quiet. The days that followed blurred together like mist curling over cracked soil, soft, uncertain, and strangely comforting. The alien, whom Mara had quietly named Solace without ever saying it aloud, didn't heal quickly, but it didn't wither. Either, that was enough. It lay in the far corner of the dome near the warmth emitters, its bioluminescent veins flickering like slow heartbeat rhythms. Though they didn't share a language, they didn't need to. In a world where even machines had stopped talking, gestures became sacred. When Mara trimmed her tomato plants, Solace watched with eyes full of fascination. When she sang quiet and off-key, as she did when checking vitals or repairing cracked filtration valves, it responded with soft hums, harmonizing in frequencies her skin could feel. One morning, as the filtered sunrise bled weakly through the dome's fractured panels, she found Solace bent near the root tanks, a hand extended gently toward a blooming violet. Its fingertips glowed faintly, but the plant glowed back, curling toward the light like it recognized the gesture. Mara stood frozen, something tight and long buried rising in her chest. Ah, wonder. That small, sacred thing humanity had lost when the Drakon replaced mystery with machinery. She walked over slowly, crouched beside it, and whispered, You feel them, don't you? The life, the pain. Solace didn't nod. It didn't know the gesture, but the tilt of its head and the soft pulse in its chest answered more clearly than words ever could. Later, as the dome groaned under a radiation storm that turned the sky red, they sat together beside the heating core, sharing silence like an old blanket. Mara took a risk. She opened the small steel box hidden under the cot, her brother's recordings. Broken hollow logs, distorted and crackling with static, but the voices still lived inside. She showed Solace a file called Sky Day, where a much younger version of herself laughed breathlessly while riding a skyboard over the Atlantic ruins, her brother's voice narrating from behind the camera. You were insane, she murmured, smiling crookily. We thought we were immortal. Solace leaned close, and for the first time, its skin shimmered with images, clouds, cities, faces. It was mimicking the memory, not to steal it, but to understand it. And when its light flickered into the form of a child, her brother's silhouette, Standing against a holographic sunset, Mara choked on a breath and turned away. "Don't," she whispered, but Solace didn't stop. It reached out, gently touching her shoulder with the weight of someone who understood loss not in theory, but in aching truth. And somehow, without words, she saw it too, a burned world of the aliens' own. A dying sun, a colony broken by hunger and betrayal. Its people were not gods. They had once been desperate survivors, just like hers. "You lost everything?" she said slowly, voice trembling like frost on glass. "Just like us." Solace nodded, not literally, but with the rhythm of its light, slow and mournful. That night, while the storm screamed outside, they sat beside each other with one memory. Glowing between them, a shared pain neither could name, but both could carry. And in the dim light of the dome, surrounded by failing machines and half-grown hope, something bloomed not from seed or science, but from simple, stubborn humanity. Connection. Asterisk. The silence broke first not with thunder or screams, but with the low, unholy whine of a scanner pulse, high frequency, distant but unmistakable. It came in a pattern. 4 clicks, a pause, then a long sweep. Mara froze mid-repair, one gloved hand deep in the air circulator valve, her breath catching as the sound vibrated through the dome like a memory clawing its way back to life. It wasn't natural. It wasn't human. And it wasn't from Solace. She grabbed her rusted signal reader, once used to track weather anomalies, and pointed it toward the horizon. The display crackled, lines jumping erratically. Her blood turned to ice as the signature locked. Drakon tuck colder, but still alive. Something up there was scanning for movement, for life. The last time she heard that sound was the day her brother disappeared into a blinding blue beam and never came back. Mara turned to Solace, who had already risen, its glow flickering into frantic patterns she'd never seen before, warning signals. Maybe. It moved quickly to the dome's edge and placed both hands against the inner glass. Its chest pulsed erratically. Then came a hum, low and trembling, that spilled into the air like a confession. And through some instinct she couldn't explain, Mara understood. The crash hadn't been an accident. Solace was being hunted. The realization unfolded like a paper, cut across her soul. Solace hadn't just wandered here, lost and injured. It had escaped something or someone. And now they were coming to finish what they started. She stormed over to it, grabbing its shoulder. "You brought them here, didn't you?" Her voice cracked, sharp and brittle. "You didn't just fall from the sky, you were running. And now they're coming." Solace didn't fight her grip. Instead, it let the shimmering patterns move across its skin, unfolding like a map, a history told in lights. She saw it all, clear as memory, a prison ship drifting through dead systems filled with species the Drakon had broken. Solace was no conqueror. It had been their captive, part of an archive of failed experiments, civilizations deemed unfit to inherit. The future. It had escaped during a solar storm, one chance in a million. And in a cruel twist of fate, it had fallen to the one place already left hollow by the same empire that had once destroyed it. "They never left," Mara whispered. "They just stopped needing us, but they kept watching." Solace shimmered. Again, an image of Earth from orbit, stripped of satellites, but still glowing with artificial eyes, always watching. The Drakon weren't gods, they were collectors. And they had noticed something they'd missed before Mara's garden. Her signal, her stubborn refusal to let life die. "They're not here for you," she said slowly, horror rising. "They're here for me, for us, because we didn't give up." The truth hit her like a physical blow. The aliens were returning, not out of vengeance, but curiosity. Something about her defiance had piqued their interest. Solace hadn't doomed her, it had simply been the mirror held up to her resistance. And now that mirror shone too brightly to ignore. She looked around the dome, the fragile plants, the flickering lights, the heat systems barely holding together. She had poured 10 years of grief and woe into this place. And now, unless she found a way to hide or fight, it would be taken, just like everything else. Solace placed a hand on her chest, and in the brief flicker of contact, showed her one last truth. It had a failsafe. A final act of defiance it had saved in case capture was unavoidable. A pulse buried deep in its core, one that could wipe out the signal, mask their presence, maybe even disable the incoming scouts. But it came at a price. The core would burn. Out. Solace would die. Mara staggered back, shaking her head. No, you don't get to trade your life for mine. That's not how this works." But Solace simply stood there, still and ready. The silence between them returned. Not empty this time, but weighted with the kind of love that had no name-only choices. Outside, the scan pulse returned again. 4 clicks, a pause, then a long, lingering sweep. Mara didn't sleep that night. The dome was too quiet, the kind of silence that comes before a storm or a slaughter. She paced the perimeter like a caged animal, eyes darting toward the sky with every faint flicker. The pulses were getting closer, louder, crawling across the surface of the world like fingers pressing against bruised skin. The Drakon were coming. Not in full invasion fleets. Those days were long past, but with precision, like scientists revisiting a petri dish. They didn't need armies when curiosity was enough to kill. Her greenhouse, her plants, her defiance, they'd drawn attention. And Solace had only accelerated it. It had been quiet too, watching her with eyes that glowed gently in the dark. It sat by the heat core, unmoving, the failsafe still dormant inside its chest, the choice still unspoken. Mara hated the silence more than the noise. She couldn't bear the idea of letting it sacrifice itself. Not after what they'd shared. Not after finally remembering what it meant to be alive. But the next morning, everything changed. A shriek tore through the clouds, and a shape fell from the sky, sleek, black, almost beautiful. A Drakon drone, tall and glimmering like obsidian smoke. It didn't attack. It simply hovered at the crater's edge, waiting, watching. Recording. She grabbed her pulse rifle, the last relic of an old resistance that died screaming, and aimed. Though she knew it was useless. The drone scanned her, blue light sweeping over her face. She pulled the trigger anyway, and the bolt of plasma did nothing. It passed through the thing like wind through fog. A message crackled from it then, in a voice both familiar and wrong. Life detected, purpose unclear, anomaly observed. Requesting retrieval. They weren't asking, they were coming. Mara turned back toward the dome, rage boiling. Into motion. She couldn't let them take it. The garden, the last breath of Earth's spirit, and Solace, who had become more than an alien, who had become her companion, her mirror, her memory of who humans used to be. She raced inside, found Solace already standing, already glowing brighter than she had ever seen it. No, she said, gripping its arm. There has to be another way. We can hide. We can run. But Solace only looked at her, and in that look was the truth. There was no time. There was no escape. The only way to protect this place was to become invisible, to erase their presence entirely. And that meant letting Solace burn. It touched her again, and she saw herself, not just the present, but the past and future all at once. A child planting her first tree. A teenager watching the stars. A woman holding her brother's hand as their parents vanished in a flash of white light. She saw Earth not as a dead world, but as a memory trying to speak. And she saw how Solace had once held the same images of its own kind, now lost. That connection, that shared grief. It wasn't weakness. It was power. But the kind of power the Drakon didn't understand. Couldn't replicate. Mara's throat tightened as she realized. The hardest part wasn't choosing to let Solace go. It was letting it choose for itself. So she stepped back. Voice cracking. If you're sure, do it. But not just to hide us. Show them something they won't understand. Solace tilted its head slowly, then knelt near the roots of her oldest plant, a stubborn sunflower that had bloomed against every odd. It placed its hand in the soil, and its body began to hum, light flaring in steady waves. The heat rose instantly. Not violent, but immense, controlled, purposeful. She ran to the control panel and cut all external power feeds. Anything connected to the old satellite net. The signal went dark. Outside, the drone began to flicker. Confused, the failsafe had begun. Mara dropped to her knees beside Solace, both hands on the soil that burned with his light. She whispered, "Make them afraid of what they'll never understand." And the dome exploded with silent brilliance. Asterisk, the sky didn't just brighten, it ignited. A column of pure light erupted from the dome, not with fire, but with memory. It wasn't a blast. It was a message. Solace was speaking, not with words. Not even with light in the visible spectrum, but with emotion embedded in energy. The failsafe had not been a weapon. It was a final act of communion. And the moment it triggered, everything that had ever been felt, everything that had ever been lost or loved in this place, became visible across the heavens. Mara staggered as the light passed through her, not harming, but remaking. She felt her knees buckle, not from pain, but from the unbearable intimacy of it. Grief, love, defiance, kindness, sacrifice amplified through a being who had seen the universe and still chosen her. Images blazed around them, children playing under ruined skies, families sharing last meals in underground shelters, old women reading faded books by candlelight. Human moments, small ones, beautiful ones, forgotten ones. The kinds of things no Drakon archive had ever recorded. The kinds of things they had erased in their obsession with order. The hovering drone trembled, its form glitching as Solace's BROADCAST poured into its systems. Dracon tech was flawless until it encountered something it couldn't categorize. And now, Solace had given it something incomprehensible, meaning without utility, life without logic, hope without reward. The drone shrieked, a piercing data burst, and tried to flee, but the light followed. It wasn't trapping it, it was sharing. Mara watched as the drone lifted higher into the sky, trailing sparks, trying to escape the memory of humanity. And then, one by one, other lights appeared on the horizon. Not drones, not ships, just glimmers' eyes of distant watchers. Dracon listening stations in the upper atmosphere, long silent, now flickering with confusion, they had heard. They had felt Solace's body begin to tremble. Its frame was disintegrating, but not violently. It was becoming light itself. The failsafe wasn't destruction, it was transcendence. And even as its form vanished, its voice wordless and ancient echoed through Mara's chest like a heartbeat too large. For flushed-up Mara stood at the center of her dome, wind howling through broken seals, plants glowing faintly with borrowed energy. Around her, the air shimmered with lingering emotion, a sky painted in remembrance. A universe interrupted, then the light faded. The signal was gone. The drones withdrew. The watchers went silent. Solace was gone, but the garden still stood. Mara collapsed to her knees, not in despair, but in awe, because in all her years surviving, she had never felt so seen, so understood. She had been ready to die a ghost. But now, someone out there knew what humanity was, what it could be, not because they fought back, but because they remembered how to feel. The world didn't change overnight. The sun didn't rise brighter, and the oceans didn't return. But something had shifted, something deep and quiet, like the slow unfurling of a flower long thought dead. Mara stood alone in the middle of her greenhouse, surrounded by silence and ash, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel empty. The place where Solace had stood was now a soft depression in the soil, still faintly warm. Around it, the plants bloomed faster than they should have. The sunflower that had once struggled in the corner now stood taller than her, its golden face lifted toward a sun that no longer shone. It glowed faintly from within, not from any trick of light, but from something Solace had left behind, some energy deeper than science. Life, raw and determined. She moved slowly through the garden, touching each leaf, each stem, as if greeting old friends. Her fingers were cracked and calloused, her body still bearing the weight of a lifetime's grief. But now, her steps had purpose. Her breath no longer came from duty, but from choice. She whispered names into the soil, names of the lost, of the loved, of the ones she'd tried to keep alive in memory. She whispered Solace's name too, though she knew it had never been called that. It didn't matter. The name was hers now, part of her rhythm, part of Earth's last heartbeat. Weeks passed. The scans didn't return. No more drones came. Whatever Solace had shared, it had been enough. The Dracon didn't come to retrieve or to punish. Perhaps they didn't know how. Or perhaps, for the first time, they had seen something that couldn't be collected or controlled, and that terrified them more than resistance ever could. Mara rebuilt the dome, not to hide, but to preserve. She rewired old transmitters and began sending signals, not distress calls, but stories. Human stories, a child's laugh, a mother's lullaby, the creak of old floorboards under dancing feet, sounds of a world that had never given up on being alive. She didn't care if no one heard. It was enough to speak again, sometimes at night. She sat outside with the sunflower towering above her, its petals humming with faint light. She would stare at the stars, not with longing, but with defiance. They had taken everything, her brother, her world, her future, but they couldn't take this. Not the choice to care, not the courage to hope. And far away, perhaps in systems still cold and sterile, perhaps within the silent archives of a species that had tried to erase wonder, the echo of what Solace became still rippled. An alien who had no reason to trust, and a human who had every reason to hate, had created something bigger than survival. They had created memory. And memory, when it burns bright enough, can outlast even stars. Mara closed her eyes and laid her head back against the soil. The earth still breathed. So would she, until someone else heard and remembered.